Hey there, my name's Niandra, and this week I want to critique a video by Wack called Top 5 Worst Passive Abilities. His videos get recommended to me a lot, so I checked a few of them out and none of them are bad, but I noticed I disagree with like 90% of what he says, so I wanted to do a response. I'll link the original video in the description below, and I recommend you watch it so you know I'm not misrepresenting him. I have nothing against Wack personally, and honestly, I think he just gave himself a really hard subject to work with on this one. Okay, let's start with his number 5, and it's Hanzo's wall climb.
This isn't a bad passive ability, but what I find funny is that Hanzo's counterpart, his brother, not only has this exact same passive ability, but an even better version which allows him to double jump. So it's kind of like Daniel versus the cooler Daniel.
And can you take a wild guess at who's the cooler Daniel?
Even though it's a well-known fact that I do not like Hanzo, it's just a straight-up fact that Genji's is better than Hanzo's. Like double jump versus no double jump? Hanzo mains are still gonna try to argue it, and that's the funniest part.
Wack's main complaint is that it's not as good as Genji's, and what really bothers me here is that there's no mention of the two characters' different roles. Hanzo is a sniper and Genji's a highly mobile flanker hero. When comparing things in Overwatch, we shouldn't look at them in a vacuum because we can basically force whatever narrative we want. Like, whenever a new hero comes out, there's always a forum post about how something is OP because it kills a stationary training bot in a second, when it's not really a good example because the actual game isn't like that. I don't really care if wall climb is weaker than Genji's because it should be, and it's still strong for what Hanzo's role is. Traditionally, snipers don't get much mobility in video games as a trade-off for their domination at long range, and Overwatch has always broken this rule, which is understandable due to the game's focus on movement. A sniper with wall climb is powerful because it allows for quick access to high ground. This is of interest for a variety of reasons, from simply positioning away from a fight to finding angles on the enemy team that ignores their shields. Keep in mind as well, high ground is not rare in this game. In fact, a lot of points like Nimbani A and Watchpoint A are almost built around it. Another thing to consider is that Hanzo was given a leap ability a while back, and while it's not quite a double jump, it is even more mobility. It's actually been pretty controversial, and many have complained that this hero now has too little weaknesses. Like, would you really want a sniper that can one-shot at basically any range having a double jump? I also just think it's kind of funny to compare Hanzo and Genji. I know the video came out in July, but currently Hanzo is in a much better state than Genji, to the point where he is probably going to get nerfed after this next patch where Genji got buff goes through. He's a jack of all trades, master of few with no real downside as long as you can play him, while Genji's basically a nanoblade bot outclassed by the supports he was supposed to specialise against. What I'm trying to say here is Hanzo is by far the cooler Daniel right now. And moving on to number 4, it's Baptiste's Exo Boots.
Now, yes, I understand this is a passive ability that allows him to put himself into better positions, whether it's on the high ground, whether it's in a safer area, whatever the case may be. But you also have to imagine that Baptiste is really effective when it comes to the immortality field, and when you use this passive ability when you're in the immortality field, say for an example, you're jumping out of the immortality field into harm's way. And to make matters worse, you're jumping into a linear direction, which just puts you into harm's way of, say, a Widowmaker snipe, a Hanzo snipe, a soldier, and on. It's just so predictable whenever you use your exo boost. Yeah, you have a little bit of leeway for when and where you want to drop, but it's still not something that really enhances Baptiste and can sometimes even hurt Baptiste because you're jumping out of a safe area, out of your little tumbler circle, and you could possibly die because, well, you were using a passive ability.
I think it's interesting to see two mobility-related passives that have no cooldown in a row when, again, Overwatch does revolve around movement. Like, keep in mind, Baptiste is currently the only support with vertical mobility that isn't reliant on teammates or the environment. My main problem with this one is I'm just not a big fan of it's bad because it's risky as an argument against something in Overwatch. He mentions that exo boots make you jump over your immortality field, and my first thought is, okay, let's simply take that into consideration while playing. In fact, now that it has 50 less HP, you sometimes want to before it breaks. To me, everything in Overwatch should be vaguely risky because that forces you to think before doing something. Decision making should bring more value than playing mindlessly, and a lot of these complaints can be solved by good awareness. Outside of that though, I think exo boots are fine. Apart from being a bit clunky control-wise, they're great at finding angles on your team that really allow you to push the AoE aspect of his healing grenades. If the enemy team has Shatter, you can try to play around it. You can bait more mobile enemies by jumping onto high ground, falling down, and then jumping back up because your mobility has no cooldown. I'd say it's pretty flexible as long as you're aware of the enemy team. In fact, a lot of Baptiste guides I've found actually suggest keeping his boots charged pretty frequently. One argument I would have liked to have seen is a comparison to Mercy's super jump, because I definitely think you can make a case for either one being the more powerful movement, which is kind of iffy because one's an unofficial piece of tech and the other an actual defined ability. You could also ask if a character with an already full kit needs a passive on top of everything else. You know, like compare him to various release heroes and he's definitely a lot more complex. Basically, what I'm trying to say is I like the boots, I definitely think there are arguments against it, but the video kinda skips over them. Next at number 3 is Sombra's passive Opportunist.
This is what you call a lazy passive ability, because this notifies Sombra, and only Sombra, that someone on the enemy team is below 50 HP and is outlined in this red silhouette and you can see through walls. But this is where things become obsolete, because wanna know what else can notify you that someone is below 50 HP? Your teammates! Your teammates can say someone is half, someone is 1. This is why this is a lazy passive ability. And some players will argue saying, well, I don't have teammates in game chat or my teammates are notifying me, and that's the problem right there! Ow, I hit my elbow. This is just one of those passive abilities that you have to ask yourself, what does it really do?
I read through the video comments and this section has definitely gotten the most flack. There's plenty of people saying, hey, actually this one's good, hell, maybe even one of the best passives. Personally, I'm inclined to agree, I love this one. Sombra's damage isn't super high, and being able to scope out low health targets in real time to finish them off is a fantastic way to contribute to a team fight, especially since Sombra struggles against clumped enemies outside of EMP. Bro's issue seems to be that it is negated by allies calling out low health targets, and I disagree with this. For starters, you have to deal damage to an enemy personally to see their health bar, and surely we've all come across callouts that were wrong, right? Like, hey, Mercy's 1, actually no, she healed because we didn't stop her health regen kicking in. The other thing to consider is that Sombra is a team-oriented character that should already be shot calling. She should be calling out who she hacks, who's isolated, and adding on who's low isn't really asking much. Another thing that wasn't mentioned is how Sombra's passive remains active while she's dead, which is so cool to me. Being dead in Overwatch is often a pretty big deal because numbers advantage, and being able to contribute while out of the fight is a nice little strength over those who can't. Personally, I am very big into shot calling, and when dead, I try to use spectator cams to watch for flanks on allies, and seeing health bars allows me to convey an extra level of information. For me, Overwatch just has too many different what-if scenarios to be able to say that seeing enemy health bars is bad. Like, I love Mercy, and she can see health bars during Valkyrie, which I also think is one of its most underrated aspects. Moving on to number 2, it's Diva's Eject.
This is one of the most unique and greatest passive abilities of all time, but it hurts the gameplay flow. Have you ever heard of a stagger? Of course you have, because you're smart. You actually study up on Overwatch. If you know anything about Diva, she is the one hero that is always subject to staggering.
Okay, fine, I guess. A part of me feels this shouldn't really count as a passive, but I think Blizzard just considers any hero mechanic without a HUD icon to be one. Categorized as a passive though, yeah, I think it's fair to put it on the list. Personally, I've never really had any issues with Baby Diva or thought about her much. If you get staggered, either try to run away or attack one of the supports, just something that forces the enemy team to kill you. Although she's fallen in recent months, Diva has consistently been a very strong hero in Overwatch's history, and with basically a second life, you could argue that it is fair for there to be a downside, and keep in mind, the enemy team has to take advantage of it to be a downside. The main thing to consider though is Diva would probably need her ultimate reworked if she didn't have the baby phase, as it kinda ties everything together. She would be so different if she couldn't detach from her mech to throw it, like you'd have to get close to enemies, meaning she'd probably need her boosters reset upon ult, maybe that'd be too good. Basically there's just like a lot of what ifs here. And last of all, number 1 is Junkrat's Total Mayhem, where he drops explosives upon death.
Yeah, it does a lot of damage when someone stands over your grenades that you just lobbed out whenever you die. But then you have to ask yourself, how many stupid players are there in Overwatch that are gonna see these bright red grenades over this dead Junkrat body and walk over it and die?
Okay, I think the complaints on this one are absolutely valid. It's definitely fair to say that Total Mayhem isn't great, and a part of me feels like that shows how fine passive abilities are in general. To give some praise though, I feel Total Mayhem goes very well with Junkrat's zealous, chaotic personality. It's a game mechanic that suits the character design first and hero design second. Besides this one, we haven't seen death-based hero passives since, and that's probably for good reason. Total Mayhem kind of has to be crappy because you don't really want to encourage it being ingrained into the user's playstyle. For Junkrat, a lot of your Total Mayhem kills are just gonna be, oh, that just so happened to hit someone, because going out of your way to die in hopes of hitting an enemy is basically throwing outside of a friendly graviton surge, and even then, chucking your primary fire will likely have a similar effect. On Discord, we tried to theorycraft on how we could make Total Mayhem more viable and then realised we don't want it to be. Wack also mentioned in his pinned comment that he didn't talk about the aspect of Total Mayhem that protects Junkrat from his own minds, which honestly that's kind of fair. I think Blizzard probably should have just separated it into 2 passives. So yeah, there we go, that's all from me. I hope you enjoyed this little breakdown of another video. Thank you so much for watching. I recently uploaded a 2-minute reading of the Mercy comic to my Patreon, and I might dabble in some other readings as well. Plus, I do VOD reviews for $5, so feel free to check that out, and have a nice day.